Hi everyone. In this video, let's look into React, how the React works, and we'll look into the basics of React. So in React, the basic unit of React is a React element, and React elements are placed in React components. So in simple terms, we can call a component as a building block of a large-scale React application. So there are class-based React components and function-based components. So the trend is to use function-based React components. So we'll look into that now. I'm going to show you a sample React component. I'll create a sample React element. And let's say example.jsx. So React makes use of JSX syntax, XML in JavaScript syntax. So a basic React component looks like this. It's a function, let's say a header. A basic React element, we can create a React element with React libraries create element function. So you can actually create an h1 element with no properties, attributes. In the second place, I'm passing attributes as null, which means it doesn't have any attributes. And the children of that element will be passed in the third argument. As of now, I'm giving hello world as the child of this h1 element. This is how you create a basic React element. So on top of it, there is React components, which we can combine multiple elements into one single component, one single reusable component. And let's see how to create that. So a React component is just a function. Let's see, I will name it as header. The convention or the rule is to start the component name with a capital letter. Let's say header. So this is a function component. This is a function component. And this component has to return some JSX syntax. So JSX syntax is similar to HTML. You can see over here. The same component element can be built with the JSX syntax like this. The syntax is nothing but creating this element. And in a basic React application, the app itself is a component. In our React application, the main entry point will look like this: function app. It returns JSX, which could be something like this. It can have other JSX elements. Let's say in this example, I'm going to use header as a child of this, like this. If we define a component like this, we can use that component as a child of another component like this. And let's say I have another component called main, which looks like this. And there can be another component, footer, like this. So we are actually building a complete application by dividing components, dividing elements into components, a group of elements into components, and reuse those components in every other place. So React components also have something called properties. So for example, this header, maybe if this header needs to be customized, we can actually make use of properties. So these are the arguments that will be passed to the header component. So from these properties, we can actually use something like this. If there is some property called title, we can actually use that title here. So in order to use JavaScript elements in the JSX, we have to enclose them in opening and closing braces like this. Props.title. So this title is a property that's going to be passed to header. So that property, I'm going to pass it from here like this. Title, let's say example as wheat. So hello wheat is what it will display. So we'll see this thing in practice in a few minutes. This is how the components work. So in order to see how these components get translated into actual JavaScript, we can actually play around with a tool called React Playground, which we can go to use by going to playground.react.dev. Here we can see the basic React component, how this React component is going to get translated into actual JavaScript. We can add any of our component here. We can add any of the components here, and we can see the resulting JSX here. If you want to learn React on your own, or if you want to reference React library, you can actually use react.dev. This is a pretty good library of tutorials you will find here. There's a good place to start, and it's ever useful. It's very useful. Let's go back to this, and let's copy our component, header component from here, and see how that looks in the actual compiled version of the JavaScript. So we can see here. So this is what it is resulting in. Okay, one more. The next thing is React. For React developers, there is a useful extension called React Developer Tools, which we will be using extensively in this tutorial. React Developer Tools, you can actually go to React Developer Tools and install it in your Chrome. The same extension is available even for Firefox as an add-on. Suppose, let's say if I go to a website, if I want to see the React components that this website has, you can actually right-click, or you can actually go to the extensions and click on this React extension. So this page does not use any React. So whereas this page, let's go to this page and see if this uses React. You can go to extensions and click on React Developer Tools, and this is actually using React components. You can see all the components in your inspect window. If you go to inspect, and if you go to component section here, you can find all the React components that have been implemented in this page. So this tool will be using extensively. This tool will be using extensively in our learning. So if you want to experiment with new React elements, create on the fly React elements, you can actually use something called react.new. This will open up an online editor, which we can use to create React components and see how they look in the browser like this. So for this tutorial, I'm going to use a framework called Vite. Vite is a tool that allows us to create React and other type of applications. Vite is a tool that configures React application and other types of applications, which we'll be using in this tutorial. So for using Vite, let's go to VS Code. We want to move this out. Let's create a new folder. We don't need to create a new folder. Let's use Beat to create a new React project. So I've opened my terminal over here. Let's go create React application with Beat as a tool. So for that, I'm going to use the command npm create using Beat. I'm going to give my project name as my React project, 2 hyphens, and then template React. You can use React, TypeScript, and other templates. You can refer to the list of templates available in the Beat website. For now, we will be using JavaScript itself. Let's create this. As you can see here, the execution of shell scripts is disabled in this shell. So in order to enable this, I have to go open my PowerShell as an admin, run as administrator, and I have to use a command called set execution policy unrestricted. Let's use this as to all, and that's it. Now I can go back to the PowerShell, close this PowerShell, and reopen it. And I'm going to run this command again. And this time it's going to execute. So this is asking me to proceed or not. I'll choose yes. Let's go execute npm instead. Let's execute this command, npm create week latest, my React project, template is React. Enter, proceed. Select a framework. The framework is React. And it's asking me whether to use TypeScript or JavaScript. I'll use JavaScript. Okay. We have a project created for us. If you go into package.json, you can see dependencies here. React version 19 and React ARM version 19. And now we have to go into this and execute npm install in order to install the packages. Let's open this in terminal. Let's run npm install. And it's now installed. Let's run the server with npm run dev. If you can see the scripts here, dev runs the server, development server. Let's run it. And we can open the browser on this port 5173. Just click on this and it will open the application here. And we can close this terminal while the server is still running. It will run in the background. Now let's go customize this application to our liking. So if you go into the source folder, there is a entry point called main.jsx, which has this syntax. Basically, what it is doing is mounting this app component on the root element in the index.html. So index.html is the default page that gets rendered when we launch the web page on this port, and it has an element with ID as root. So you see this ID, and this ID is being selected by the main.jsx file script, and we are selecting that in the root element we are selecting, and rendering in that element all the React components. So this app is a React component. For now, we can just ignore this strict mode component. We'll get into what is strict mode at a later point. If you go to the app component, so app.jsx has the app component. Let's go to that. And if you see here, this is the entire template for this particular page. So here I'm going to change a simple thing. Instead of this title, I'm going to use my own custom title, my React project, or I'll just use my toy store. You can send it. We can actually use any of our custom messages here. For example, if I want to use a custom property, I can use it like this. Let's say I have a variable called language, which is JavaScript. And you can use this in the header like this. If you're using HTML, if you're using JavaScript inside this JSX syntax, you have to use curly braces like this. I can use this, any variable that is declared in the JavaScript code like this. You can see the difference. Let's now create a new component. For example, in this file, I can create a new component, or I can actually create a new component in an entirely different file and import it over here. For simplicity's sake, let's use create a new component within this file, and later we will move it to a new file. So for declaring any component, we need to define a function. Let's say in this component, I'm going to use header as a name of the component, and in that, I'm going to return some JSX. So this is JSX. I'll use header as my toy store. So this header I'm going to use in the app. So I'm going to remove the entire thing from here. And let's create freshly whatever we need. And this component is going to return something like this. A division. Inside it there will be a header. The header is rendered from this component, and I'll have a name tag within this. Welcome to my store. Let's go visit the website. You can see this. Nice. And the next logical step is to have properties defined for this component. So we will accept some properties from the header and use their properties in the message or in the body of the JSX. Let's use props as a property name, and let's pass some value to name. Let's say I will give name as Alex. So all the properties that we pass in the header will be received in the props property. And let's say I will use props.name here. Instead of my toy store, I'm going to use props.names toy store. Let's look at it now. Alex's toy store. So similarly, I'm going to use a copyright text, something like an extra text that I will use. Let's have one thing. A paragraph, copyright, and props start here. So here we are not passing yet. If you see here, copyright, there is empty. So we have to pass in the year from the attributes over here. Year as let's do one improvement 2025 like this. If you're passing in directly strings, you can just pass like strings like this. If you're passing in integers or any other data types, we have to enclose them in parentheses like this, 2025. Now we can see this. So if I want to dynamically calculate this year, I can actually make use of any JavaScript function like this. You want to create a new data object and get full year from that. And that dynamically adjusts the current year state, current year of the current date. Same thing. So the next thing is we are actually referring to props.name and props.year. Basically, there can be an improvement we can do here. Instead of receiving props, there is something called object deconstruction mechanism, which we'll be using. So actually to deconstruct name and year from props, we can actually make use of the syntax, name and year. So name and year properties will be destructured from the properties that are passed into the header component from here. So if I'm deconstructing, I don't have to refer to them as props.name or props.year. I can just refer to them as name and year respectively. Let's go back and see. Everything looks nice. Same as before. Okay. Now let's implement some list syntax here. Suppose if I have a main component, let's build a new component called main, which renders a list of items in the toy store. Say this one returns an unordered list, and inside it there is list of items. And let's use this main over here. Stuff. Yes, I'm going to use main component like this. And we see here. Okay. So what if I want to make this dynamic? We can make a new variable constant all items, and this can be a list of items. Let's say I have apple or cat, dog, and these items I want to render using the main. Let's move it above. Let's say I want to pass these items as parameters to main. I can actually use that as this way. Items, or let's say list items. I'll make the name as list items, and I'm going to pass in the list items from here as a property. And these items I can move it closer to this app component, and these items I can pass it over this parameter. And we can refer to this list items within this JSX syntax like this. We'll remove this, and instead we will have this list dynamically get generated. We'll enclose this in JavaScript syntax. So for the list items, we will map all these list items. For each of the list items, we want to return each items enclosed in list syntax like this. Inside it, I want to use item. If we go back, you see this is exactly where it should be. And if I add any new element to it, it gets automatically added to the list. So let's just remove these bullets here. If I want to remove this disk syntax, disk elements, I can go see the list items default properties. List style type is disk. So this one I can change it. List style type is disk. If I change this to none, that will become list style type none. If I do, that will be gone. So this one I'm going to do it in the JSX syntax. In order to use this style type, I have to make use of style attribute for the list element like this. So in JSX, style is an object. So we are enclosing the styles within JavaScript notation, and we are actually using a style object like this. So there will be two traces here. Inside the style object, I'm going to use list style type. So it translates from this. If there is a hyphen in between the property, we should capitalize that like this. This is the JSX syntax for style attributes. So here I'm going to use none as the list style type. If you see here, all those are gone. So if we inspect this and see the list items and their respective style properties translated into list hyphen style hyphen type. So this is one important thing to remember in JSX. And if you see the console here, let's reload and see. And there is a warning over here. Each child in a list should have a unique key property. So this is internal to React. So wherever we are using a list of items, we also have to specify a key property that allows us to differentiate between each elements, differentiate each element from one another. If any element has to be re-rendered, so it's a easy way to for the React to know which element has to be re-rendered. So we have to specify a property called key here that is unique to each of the list items that we are going to do next. So let's remove this. So in order to use that key element, we can actually pass in one more parameter to this map function. Basically, the map function gives two parameters to the callback function. The first parameter is the actual item itself, and the second parameter is the index of the item in the array. Let's say I will name it as I. So this I can be used as a key. Let's use key equals I here. Let's reload, and that error is gone. But this is not the best way to do this. So React recommends us to use item objects instead of item index like this. Let's use a better way. So let's do one small thing here. Let's create a constant called item objects. So we're going to use items map. Same kind of syntax. For each item, we are going to return an object with ID as item number and title as item. It just has to be use. Let's define item objects. We'll do items.map, similar function. It returns an object which will accept this function accepts item and the index, and we are going to return ID as index and title as item, just like that. So this, instead of using the items, this items directly, we are going to use this item objects, and pass this over here as a list of objects. So in the list items iteration, we are going to use map function for each item. We are going to use item.id, and we will use item.title. This is exactly doing the same thing, but this is the recommended way to use the objects. Let's format this. We can make use of syntax like this. Giving it. Okay. That's about listing the list of items. How about displaying images? Let's go use an image here. Let's say here in this place, I'm going to use an image. Syntax goes like this. Source should be some kind of image. Let's say my image. Let's import an image, or this can be an image from the library of our assets or from the public library. Let's go create a new folder called images. We will get one image from Google. And let's move that here. Go to downloads and get this image. Here. So I've copied the image to this place and use that image here. So in order to import the image, we have to use this import my image. We can give any name to this image. The location of the image is what it is. Let's use images, and we will use my image.jpg. And we are going to use my image in the image syntax over here. Let's put image. We'll give the source as this. We'll give height as 200 pixels or 300 pixels, maybe nice. Width as 300 pixels. Let's see how this looks. Nice. Suppose if I want to use a URL instead of image like this, or static image like this, if not static image, if not local image, if we want to use online resources, we can actually use the same in this source property. Instead of using the image, imported image here, we will use an HTTP URL, HTTPS URL. I'll just use github.com image, width as 100, height as 100, like this, and it looks the same. So this is how we use images and import images. Suppose, let's say I will add one more inside this main container. Let's move these into the main container instead. Do this. Put it over the main container, just above UL element. And we can see that there is some kind of error, as you can see from the underlining. I go to the browser, it complains that we can't have more than one element inside one component, so one parent element. So that means actually this is three components in parallel, three HTML elements at the same level. So we cannot have more than one HTML element as a parent. So let's have div here and enclose this entire thing in a div, and that will be gone. The error will be gone. Let's reload. See, this was what we used to do. So as we wrap more and more elements into these components, we kept on adding divisions. So there is an optimization further for new versions of React. We don't need to use this div anymore. We call these syntax as fragments. You can embed all your code into fragments, and this fragment will not render any extra HTML. If I don't use this fragment, and if I inspect this element, you can see that there is a division wrapped around this. Let's remove this and use fragments instead. I reload. See here, these two elements and this another list element, they are all at the same level and they're not wrapped into a div. So this will save us from bloating up the HTML with division elements. This is the advantage of fragments. These are called fragments. Opening and closing fragment like this. Okay, now this is about how the React components work. So the next thing is to manage state of the components. Let's say one component affecting another. Let's say two elements. Let's say we have a shopping cart, and whenever somebody adds to the cart element has to get updated, and such kind of details. How do we handle that? This is called state transitions. So before going into state transitions, we need to see some syntax elements of JavaScript. So we can define an array called animals. Let's see, giraffe. This is an array of animals, zebra, bear, and this, let's say I want to use these. Let's just do console log of animals. If I go to console, it gives me the animals. Okay, if I want to accept or get only the first element, I can do it with syntax like this. So how about getting this? There is one more optimization I can do, a syntax optimization. Yes, I can actually use another constant, let's say like this, first animal, and assign to this, assign with this. If I do this, the first animal will have the first element because it's the first thing in the array. This is called array deconstruction, just like the object deconstruction we used here. Name and age. Similarly, we can use array deconstruction like this. I do console log of first animal. Sure. And if I want to skip multiple elements, let's say I want to have second animal, I can use that too, like this. We can do that. Suppose if I want to skip one element or second element, I can just use a comma and then third element. I can use like this. So this is array deconstruction. So this is useful for our next lesson. which is state transitions, state management in React. So in React, we make use of a hook called use state to actually work with the states. So we have to import that with this syntax. Import use state from React. Let's go use this in our app component. We comment out this part, making this. Inside the app component, we are going to use state. It's just assigned to one value here. Let's see what variable has. Let's do console log of what. State. Let's use this state. Let's define a value called what and use state and assign to it, and let's see what variable has, what constant has. If you see here, let's do refresh. And if you see here, there are two values in this. What has been returned with an array. So first element is undefined and second one is a function. So basically what this empty parenthesis is doing is that it's assigning undefined to what? The first value of what. What is an array? Let's convert this what into an array. And let's say this status and set status. So useState is returning two values in an array. First value is the value that we initialized with. Let's say I will change to open. Status as open. It will initialize the status to open. And set status is a function that will allow us to set this status. So let's move this, or let's put status here and reload. So this is open. So we will use set status in order to set values to status. Let's just introduce for making use of set status function. Let's use a button, or let's say I'll use the status variable here, and then we will use set status to set status of this variable. Let's use the store is currently. We'll use the status value here, open or closed. If I go back here, store is currently. Let's use a button in order to change the state value. On click. On click is a event handler. On click of this button, what has to happen? We can define here. Set status as closed. Whatever value we pass in here will be set into this status state variable. So we'll name this button as close store. And let's go back. So there is a button. If we click on that, the state has been changed and the value is being changed to closed. So that is something we can do here. And implement over the current status. Instead of using the status as a string, we can actually use it as a boolean, representing whether the state store is open or closed, and make this button as a toggle instead of hardcoding the closed. Let's use this as a true, which means status is open. So in that case, we will have to use status here. There is a operator called ternary operator, which allows us to check the condition whether a status is true or false. Whether a boolean is true or false, based on that condition, it dynamically renders components or text. So status, if I use question mark, the first thing after question mark will be what has to be displayed when the status is true. And when the status is true, I want to display open. And after that, I have to put a colon. After that, a second argument, closed. So if status is true, it has to display open. If not, it has to display closed. Let's go see that in the browser. Status is currently open, which is true, which is initialized to true. And we have to change the status. Whenever I click this button, it's a toggle store. Whenever I click this button, it has to change the property from true to false or false to true based on the current status. If the current status is true, it has to mark it as false. For that, I have to negate this with this syntax. So this is a not operator. This will change the true value to false and false value to true. If the current status is open, true, it will make it to false. If it was false, it will make it to true. So let's go back and check this out. Click on this and it changes to closed. If I click on it again, it changes to open. And now we have achieved that, and same syntax we can use the same here. Instead, this time, if the status is open, I want to make the text as close store, and if it was closed, after make it as open store button. Let's go demonstrate this. So current status is open, and this button shows as closed store. Click on this, and the current status got changed to closed, and the button showing as open store. This is an action button, the opposite of what is displayed here. That's it. We have implemented a toggle button. So we have all handled this in the parent component here. Let's say, for example, I have another statement, something like the same statement within a child. So within this main component, if the store, so to demonstrate this, let's move this two elements below this. And let's see this. One second. Okay. Very efficient. Okay, I've moved these two lines to the bottom so that we know which is the parent and which is the child. So this element is the child of the overall parent element. So now I have the same statement. I will copy this statement over to the main component over here, just above this, and make sure that this is H2 to differentiate this child and which is parent. But this store is currently closed. Okay. That's because the status has not been passed. The status value has not been passed from the parent component. to the child component. So this status I need to pass in as a parameter to this main component, just like this. Store status, full status. Now if I pass this and I'll go change the main component, accept store status as a one more parameter and use that status over here. And now I can see the status has been passed down to the child component as well. So what if I want to change this? If I do flow status, it will change. But what if I have another button over here which I want it to affect this status? So I need to pass in the set status function also in that case. So as I have defined set status here, I should actually pass in that as a parameter to the child element where I want the status change to happen. On status, let's say I will give a parameter as on status. I'm going to pass in this to main as a property on status, and I will implement one more button over here. This button toggle. So on click, I will call this on status change, or just I will use close as the status. On status to false. So this one only allows to close the store, not open the store. Let's reload. And this close button, let's click on this and it is closed. Now, if I click on this again, it doesn't do that because we are setting the status to false always. Whenever we are clicking on this button, we are setting the status to false. Whereas in here, we are setting the status to whatever is the negation of the current status. We can do the same thing here also. Let's not do that right now. So in order to open this, open this button we will use. That's how we propagate properties and functions to children of the components in this fashion, like this. There is, apart from use state, there is another thing called use reducer. Let's comment out this part and let's use another. There is something called use reducer for more advanced state transitions. Let's import that component that from the React library. Use reducer. So in order to use reducer, we have to do it like this. Use reducer will accept a callback function that accepts one parameter. Let's say I'm using status here. And that is going to set the status, return a status that is going to be used in the result. Let's just define it. So in order to use reducer, I have to define an array like this, status, and there is something called dispatch function. I'm just going to rename this. I'm going to comment out this part. and use reducer. So use reducer accepts one callback function. The argument of the function is going to be the status, and the return value is going to be the negation of status. And second argument to this use reducer is the default value for the status element, status variable. Let's use reducer in here. So in order to use reducer, you have to define an array like this. That's status, and use another thing called dispatch. The first thing is the variable, and second thing is the function. And use reducer is what we're using. And this use reducer accepts two parameters. First one is a callback function that returns something. And second thing is the default value, initial value given to this status variable. And in this, use reducer will always accept status first argument as status. And whatever is returned will be used as the new status. When we call this dispatch function, whatever is returned by this callback function will be set for this status variable. So let's use a negation value. So this is the status and returns the negated value of the status. Instead of dispatch, I'm going to rename this as toggle. And that's it. So this time, instead of using set status, we are going to use the new syntax for this, the same thing. Instead of set status, I'm going to use just this dispatch function, which is the toggle function. For this button, I'm going to use status as open closed. For this button, I'm going to use toggle function. Let's comment out this and let's handle it later. Let's see demonstration of this in the browser. Currently, status is open. I click on this. The status is closed. Click again. The advantage of using use reducer is that we don't have to handle the complex logic of what has to be passed into this set status function and all that. The entire thing will be taken care of by the reducer function. So this is more control. This provides more control at the time of declaring the dispatch function, which is the toggle function. So toggle, we can just use it and no need to worry about what parameters it accepts and everything. The entire thing is implemented already based on the type of event. So let's revert this back to previous. Comment out this part and keep this as toggle. Let's comment out this as well. And this one has to be there. Okay, this is about use reducer. So apart from this, there is something called use effect. Let's comment out this and let's go back to the previous approach of using this state. Now let's go import something called use effect from here. So use effect is a way to create side effects in the React application. So basic use of use effect looks like this. Basically, we will use use effect and it accepts a callback function that does something. Let's first do a console log and print something here. The toy store is open or closed. We will do a console log. So for using variables inside the string, I can use backcode notation like this. Toy store is status. If it is true, it will display as open. If not, closed. And note that here I'm not passing any extra arguments to this effect. I'm just using one callback function, just like this. Let's go back and see in the console. Refresh. Now the toy store is open. Let's click on this close store. And the status has been changed to closed and it displays that. So the meaning of this is that whenever this component re-renders, this use effect will run. Whenever the status, the meaning of this is whenever the status or any other value that this use effect is using changes, and this use effect block will run, this callback function will run. And if I want to control how this is run, I can actually add a second argument as an array. If I pass in an empty array, so this component runs, this callback runs only once when the component is rendered. It doesn't re-render again. Let's close this, refresh, and the toy store is let's refresh, and the statement has been printed only once. If I click on close store, open store multiple times, it doesn't re-render or reprint this statement, the current status, because we are not passing any arguments as dependencies here. It's just passing empty array. That means only call this at the initial time when the component is rendered. So optionally, I can pass in a set of values here, variables here, on affecting what value, what variable, or state. This is actually state variables. So on what state change you want to render or call this function. And if I do that now, here, refresh, it renders first time as well as whenever I click on this. Whenever the state variable is changed, status variable is changed, this gets called. So that's three ways of using use effect. So these are the important aspects of React. Use state and use effect will be the mostly used React hooks. These are called React hooks. We will go in depth into React hooks and calling remote server methods in the next video.